Hey, everybody. I'm hoping this is streaming to YouTube. Um, there we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our show, Walking the Path of Courage. We're hoping that everybody can join in live and ask questions. And for anybody who's catching the replay, we can carry on these conversations under each of our YouTube channels, or we're all three on the Ajatakasha app. And we all three have groups on the Ajatakasha app. And so if you're interested in joining that, we can post notes on that in the comments after the show. So we'll start with introductions. My name's Raquel Bravo, and I had a prompt to create this show, Walking the Path of Courage, because I felt a real calling of people wanting to kind of dive into shadow work and know a little bit more about what shadow work is, how they can start the path of shadow work, and kind of just help guide them into venturing into their patterns. So I felt called to have April and I host the show, and then Julie is our first guest. So we'll go into some more introductions. April?
So I'm April Megginson, and I have taught yoga about a decade. And I wouldn't say what I do is teach yoga anymore. I really focus mostly on pointing to habits and patterns that people have, that we all have built up over our lifetime. And I find that those habits and patterns in the body point almost directly to the habits and patterns that we have in the mind and the emotions. And so it's been a really beautiful journey. Julie, I miraculously, of course, met her, and I've never met her in person, so I can't wait for the day. But, I was directed to her 2012 or so, and she just guided me through some very profound work of unraveling those patterns and habits, and preparing me basically for doing my work in the world, to do the same in just a different, through a few different channels. And so I am very grateful that she is on here with us today. And I'm so grateful for Raquel having this inspiration and this deep intuition, and for her setting this all up, and for, allowing me to be a part of such an incredibly meaningful and beautiful conversation. Hopefully, an ongoing one. So that's me. And I'll turn it over to the wonderful Julie.
Oh, thanks so much. It's just a thrill and an honor to be here. And I'm really grateful as well for all the people that are tuning in live and those that will watch the replay, because the conversation we're going to have is really, really important. If you are, 100% committed to living authentically and in integrity, then you really have to deal with the psychological conditioning that prevents you from owning the light and the truth of who you are. So speaking about this is my passion, my number one passion. And I have been working with people on the awakening process, deepening into recognition of the self, dealing with the shadow, and then coming to a place of ending seeking altogether. So I do a lot of, coaching and counseling. I've written several books, and I'm on Buddhist Biohacker, on the Buddhist Biohacker channel, which I really love. And I also have my own YouTube channel. So I really, really love sharing from my own direct experience. And I really love supporting others to wake up to this truth, to the reality that you are it. You are what you have been searching for. And to get to this recognition, you have to go through the darkness. You have to meet it, greet it, and transform it. So we will be talking about that during this session, and I'm really excited. And again, I encourage you to ask questions, to share. This is an interactive session. This is why we're here. This is why Raquel, the idea landed in her to put this together, and for April as well to be here, because both April and Raquel have really done the work. They really have done the work.
Yeah. And I also felt called too, because my journey is still pretty fresh. And so I feel like because it's so fresh that I feel I can answer questions and kind of point the way, if you want to dive into shadow work, and some people are really afraid to make that leap, and I can share the way that I just decided I was going to do it. And it was really subtle. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to do shadow work starting today. I didn't even realize I was in the process of doing it. It was probably maybe a month of it. And then I realized, oh, I'm doing shadow work. And then I started watching the videos on Buddhist Biohacker with you, Julie, you and Lisa. And that's when I realized, oh, I am doing shadow work. And so then I just was like, let's do it. I'm going to go as deep as I can. And it doesn't matter what comes up, I'm going to face it.
Brilliant.
So, and this all happened last year for me.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
But the thing is you've already been seeing results.
Oh, yeah.
The results, right?
Yeah. I started seeing results. It probably started happening about 6 months in to the work. And I would say after the 6 months, little things would come up here and there that weren't as intense as it was in the beginning. But I started having all of my creativity started coming out while I was in the middle of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can I, I don't mean to interrupt. Can we back up a few steps? Because I find when I talk to people and use the language of shadow work, most people don't understand. So I just want to be really clear about what we're talking about. Julie, would you mind describing, since, you're the master illuminator. There's a new title for you.
That is wonderful. So look, Dr. Carl Jung famously coined the term the shadow. And he's very well known. And the way he put it is that the shadow really relates to the darkness within our personality or our psyche that we would rather not see, acknowledge, or own because of our conditioning, which is the belief that these kind of dark energies, such as anger, irritation, frustration, and all of those things are unpalatable. Or if we expressed that what we're feeling, then it would create problems, and we could likely be shunned or thrown out of a community or seen in a bad light or whatever story is going on in our heads. So in many cases what happens is we learn this behavior from a very young age, and that was certainly true in my case. I learned that I was not supposed to express anger, and it was a bad thing, and I should just shove it down and shove it away. And obviously shadow work isn't always about what we call the negative qualities. It might contain also our creative energy and our creative power too. So whatever we disregard and we disown, what happens is, because it's still there within us, we have to project it onto the world at large or onto other people. So that's why we can really have this distaste or sometimes hate for people that represent the qualities in us that we haven't owned. And so this is why shadow work is essential on the path of truth and on the path of self-recognition, because everything with respect to our humanity must be included. You can't disregard anything.
Mm-hmm. And also, like those patterns, at least for me, I had heard of shadow work, but I didn't, I would Google what is it, and I would read these definitions, and I still couldn't fully grasp what it meant. Like, what does he mean, these patterns in ourselves? And so here I thought I was like doing some inner work, but really, it wasn't. I was so unconscious in my patterns that I didn't even realize they were patterns.
Right.
And so I think too, that's, at least for me, that's where I got tripped up in trying to figure out what shadow work was that I didn't even realize I had these unconscious patterns that were driving my life.
Sure.
I think that, oh, go ahead, Julie.
No, I was going to say, and the reason that they drive your life is because they're unconscious, right?
Yes.
We don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we blame everyone and everything for the things we feel they are not giving us. Mm-hmm. But it's really our own self-limiting beliefs and negation of aspects of our personality or our psyche.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, I think you're trained in NLP also, Julie, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the NLP model, I think, is really practical because it's 2 tiers as far as what we're processing. And the first tier is processing the negative emotions. And the second tier is processing the limiting beliefs. And, I don't know how this can be quantifiable, but what I learned was we have 150,000 limiting beliefs by the time we're 7 years old. So not even to mention, later on in high school and college and all these things and things we go through. So I think it's really profound to understand. And, that NLP model talks about how the negative emotions and the limiting beliefs are like the wind, right? We don't see the wind, we see the effects of what the wind does. Mm-hmm. And so when those things start to clear out, our unconscious mind wants those programs to be just deleted. They want them gone. So that's why you're constantly walking the same pattern, or that's why the same pattern arises, because this pattern wants to be seen by your conscious mind so that you can delete it, right? Mm-hmm. It's like it's a servo mechanism sort of thing. And that sounds like very kind of, whatever. But I think for me, processing that is so practical because we are here to tell you that this is absolutely accessible to you right now. Yes. This sounds like the scary, big, huge thing. And, I think this number one step, and Julie and Raquel, you can certainly chime in on this. I think the number one action step here is to be willing to acknowledge your patterns. Mm-hmm. And to ask your patterns and your beliefs to show themselves to you, because we're not gonna be given more than we can handle, right? It happens where this is like, oh wow, how did I just react to that? Maybe it's because I believe I'm entitled or I deserve that because of this. It can be whatever. Or why did I just yell at my husband? Oh, I time traveled to when my mom treated me like that when I was like 10, right? That's what shadow work is right there. Mm-hmm. Why did I yell at that person in the car? What did they do to me? Oh, it's because I'm not acknowledging anger I have at my child right now. So, I think that's the profound thing, that it's not about this really inaccessible place. It's about just sitting down, writing an intention, if you're ready for it, and saying, I am ready to see.
So that leads me in that you don't even have to write it down. I woke up one morning and I think I watched a video of Julie, and she said, just ask the universe to give you, show you what you need to see. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to try that. I woke up one morning and I said, all right, what do I need to work on? What do I need to look at? And I put the intention out there. And then a few hours later, I took a walk with my dog. I took him to a schoolyard, and I let him off leash because we were the only ones there. And this lady shows up and she has this little teeny dog with her. And my dog wants to go play with her dog. And so he immediately sprints across the field and starts chasing her dog. Well, her dog got scared and took off running. And I kind of froze. And I was like, I thought, the dog would turn around and they would start playing, but her dog just kept running. She started screaming, like yelling at me, explicit words. And so finally I called my dog back to me and he came back to me. But the feeling that I had inside was like absolute shame that I had done something wrong. And I was so frozen that I couldn't even speak to say, hey, I'm sorry, my dog just wanted to play. I was so shut down from that experience that I couldn't even speak. And so I'm walking away and I'm feeling all these emotions in my body. And then I remembered, oh my gosh, I'd asked the universe to show me something I needed to work on. And as soon as I remembered, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go home and process why I reacted the way I reacted to this like little incident where some people it wouldn't even faze them at all. And I had completely shut down from it. Mm-hmm. And that was like the very first opening into the universe will show you what you need to see. And so it was that simple. Isn't that funny?
I mean, it's really hilarious because, as I shared in the book, my first introduction, and I wasn't even conscious. I had no clue what shadow work was at all. And I'd had years and years of these amazing, awakening experiences that were light-filled and expansive and beautiful. And then, I landed at an ashram in India and did not know what was coming. And, I was working with a group of people, and we were taking care of the logistical aspects of events. And this young woman was less than pleased with my response. She asked me to do something, and I was finishing off a Word document. And she just absolutely blew up, started cussing like a trooper, dropping the F-bomb everywhere. Her rage just filled the room. And I was so shocked. I mean, you can imagine, right? I'm in this holy place, in this ashram, with people that I thought were very elevated and very spiritual and just, wonderful. And there's this woman dropping F-bombs all over the place directed at me. So I just I get like you, Raquel, I froze. And then I didn't know, I think I uttered something, and I had to go outside to sort of catch myself. And I remember leaning up against the wall, and I felt so nauseous. I thought I was going to throw up, and my head started to spin. And I realized that this anger that was being expressed, this violent, just explosive anger that was being expressed by this woman, was mine. And it belonged to me. And I'd done a great job of pushing it down for years. That had been my whole sort of strategy from childhood. And now it was just coming up, and I needed to deal with it. And then that was when I went to the ashram library, and a book fell off the shelf at my feet, and I picked it up, and it was Chasm of Fire by Irina Tweedy. And then, I started reading it and realized, and she was describing that she'd gone to India expecting to be shown God, and instead she was shown the deepest, darkest places within herself, and it almost killed her. It was how she put it. And I realized that was where I was, and I had no choice but to find out what shadow work was. And I remember I accessed a couple of books, but like you, what I did was I just said to the universe, okay, I need to see it, bring it on. I need to see it in my life. I need to see it in my dreams. I need to see it in all my communications. And holy hell, did it show up. She was, talking about full tilt. Mm-hmm. So you really have to be ready to see it and deal with it and work with it. But
here's the thing too, is what April said. You're never going to get handed what you can't manage. Mm-hmm. Right? And so what I noticed was it started out in these little small things, like the dog chasing thing, where this eruption of emotion occurred, which when you have that eruption of emotion, you know something needs to be looked at, right? So it started out small like that for me. And I thought, oh, this isn't too bad. I can do this. This is, it's uncomfortable, but I can do this. But you have to keep wanting to go deeper and deeper and deeper and to get to the root of those patterns.
Yes.
And that was my process. Was it started out small and then things got bigger and bigger, and you can't turn away from them. You have to face them.
Yes, but people do. I've spoken about this as well. Instagram and other social media platforms are filled with people quoting the shadow and quoting whatever. But really, it's really about just knowing about the shadow, but not really taking it as deeply as it needs to go. Or people will dive in, have a few experiences, and then they'll pull back because they can't deal with it.
Yeah.
Because it can get very uncomfortable, especially when you're looking at the shadow with respect to things like your boundaries, creating healthy boundaries, or the shadow dynamic in the family, or the shadow dynamic in a spiritual community, which is always there. It doesn't matter what spiritual community you belong to, it's always there. So people oftentimes they'll well-intentioned, but they'll just dive into a little bit and then feel like pull back and be able to speak about it fairly well, but have no real understanding or no real benefit with respect to the outcome of what starts showing up in your life when you go all the way and you really start transforming, what is at the root. And the yogis call it, pulling everything out by the root, the samskaras, the seeds of karma, that just pulling that out, looking at what's there, having a conversation with it and transforming it. And obviously, you don't have to drop anchor there, but it does require some effort, continued sustained effort, rather than, let me try it for a month or a week.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, April, but for me, I needed to have guidance and a teacher for my journey. And Julie, I worked with her extensively during that period when I was doing shadow work, because I needed to be able to process what I was feeling, especially when it got really difficult. I needed to be able to process what was happening with somebody who has experienced that, somebody who has been there and who has felt that uncomfortable to where you want to quit. You want to be like, I don't think I can do this. And having that guidance and that teacher and having, somebody who knows what you're going through helps you to keep going on and carry you to the end, to the very end.
Yes.
Well, and I think for me, I talk very often about how I didn't even know that's what I was doing for a really long time. Because Julie, I was ready. I was, that's at the time where I was doing really extensive yoga therapy training at the same time. So everything was like pointing to that. And then Julie was the anchor there, but I didn't realize it. I don't know if you didn't call it shadow work. I was doing her true alignment classes, not classes, once a month. I'd get, her, I'd be so happy at the beginning of every month. I'd get the living in alignment sheets. And I think I did that for 2 or 3 years, but they were so gentle and so easy that I didn't even realize the process I was going through. Now there's a lot of drama to it. I had an experience where I was going through a yoga therapy training, which I had to do. There's only like 10 in existence in the world at that point. And I had to go I live in Virginia. I had to go up to Washington, D.C. And I was staying with one of the participants there. And we did some bandha work, which is, a yogic lock. So you probably all have done that where you drop your chin, and then there was bandha work down here in my lower, like, solar plexus area. And we were doing it to train other people to do it. And something shook loose that was so huge. And this is going to lead me into my next piece that's in my mind. Something released that was so old and so deep that, not to be graphic, but I was in this poor person's bathroom for a good 10 hours because it physically released from me. And that's the other thing, is that for me, the physical piece of this journey is so profound, because when we have the anchors to move in, then first of all, I totally agree with Raquel. Julie gave me permission, which is what I needed to feel the way I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That permission is so, it's being seen. It's being seen. Yeah. So that permission is the first tier, and the gentle pointing and guiding. And then the techniques that you acquire that resonate with you, of anchoring into your breath, or a negative emotion comes through. I remember I had a time I was doing an MBSR training, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the woman there was directly in the direct lineage of Pema Chodron. That's who her teacher was. And she held this space that was just marvelous. But it was a mirror space, right? So I would go to, because I was a yoga teacher at that point, I was a school teacher, I was used to having all the answers. I've got a sharp intellect, right? So that's what I was relying on. And so I remember saying something in this class, like I had some wise, amazing thing to say. And she just looked at me. And I remember so profoundly letting myself feel, because also this was about 2016. So I was in the midst of doing this processing and this recognizing habits. I recognized the most profound thing, and it was that I had not acknowledged embarrassment, the negative emotion of embarrassment in myself, ever. And I sat there and I felt that embarrassment, and I felt it in my body. I felt what it did. What did it create in my body? And when I became that present with it, and still, that's still what goes on with negative emotions, because negative emotions aren't about being good or bad. Negative emotion is about the negative space. That's what it's about, and processing that negative space. And we say negative emotions or bad emotions, and like, let's push it away. I'm too spiritual to feel that. I don't know why I'm angry. I've done so much work. I don't know why I'm embarrassed. I've done so much work. Well, what I found, and you all can tell me how you feel about this, is that I feel much more because that Band-Aid got ripped off. So what happens is I feel it, I recognize it very quickly, I process it, and then it's gone, poof. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean it's not there anymore, because I'm a human being, and negative emotions don't just say, oh, I'm so spiritual, let me like angel fly away here, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what my experience has been. It's much more profound experience.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And all of that speaks to, the term, which is quite popular now, spiritual bypassing, where there's a belief that you can try and sort of avoid negative feelings or emotions or thoughts or whatever, by meditating them away or chanting them away, or doing the practices to get rid of them, so to speak. And that works for a certain amount of time. I mean, I tried that. I'm sure you all have, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're super angry at a boss, or you can't stand your job, or whatever's going on, whatever the story is. Oh, let me meditate. Repeat the mantra, or whatever.
Yeah.
Rather than just acknowledging what's coming up, what the feeling is, what the thought is, because there's always a thought and a feeling that attach, right? Especially with a negative emotion. And looking at what it's there to say to you and what it's trying to reveal. And, the thing is that self-realization or enlightenment, or whatever you want to call that, the truth of being connected connected into source includes everything. It includes every feeling. It includes every nuance of one's human condition. It includes all of humanity. It includes, there's nothing that is not included, because everything is supreme consciousness itself.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say that you're spiritual, but you're disincluding this or that or the other, and especially with respect to your own feelings and emotions and, you know, your own conditioning and the dark side of the personality, then you're not being real, you're not being true, and you're not being authentic. And everything has to be welcomed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like I need to clarify that, because that all of that is true. Everything is welcomed, and just because you've done shadow work, or just even with self-realization, you're still going to get irritated, you're still going to get annoyed, but it's the emotional eruption in you. How big is it? How long is it lasting inside of you? Are you going around ranting all day long over what happened the night before? Then that's a big pointer that you need to look at something, you know, instead of just saying, well, this is just part of being human. If it's tugging on you that much, then something needs to be looked at. Because I feel like some people have, you know, it's like they have said they've done the shadow work, but they're still displaying behavior that points to not doing the shadow work, or not fully doing the shadow work. You know, does that make sense?
Yes.
And kind of doing the spiritual bypassing by saying, well, this is part of it. You have to embrace all of it. But yet their behavior shows that they haven't fully done the shadow work. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, you know, two things that come out of that. One is as well, and I've spoken about this on my channel, is that by including everything, it doesn't mean that you become a spiritual doormat, so to speak, and go around with your hands folded, you know, like you have to be just very kind and compassionate with respect to someone's behavior or someone's unconscious patterns or whatever, and you let yourself be kind of used and abused, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a call to action there with respect to calling out somebody's bullshit and not putting up with, you know, lies or deceit or manipulation or whatever that is, having strong boundaries and owning the truth of who you are and speaking from that place of authenticity. Mm-hmm. You know, and obviously there's compassion with respect to maybe working with someone, or, you know, having a family member that is deeply unconscious and hasn't even started sort of looking in that direction. There's compassion there, but that compassion also includes maybe having to speak out and say, you know, enough, or point to something that needs to be seen. So you know, all of that can be sometimes a bit tricky, because the other side of that too is that you may have to just remain quiet because it's not the time and place to say anything, or maybe the person isn't ready, or whatever's going on. Yeah. You know, so all of those things you have to become clear about, but you can only become clear about where you stand and what your call to action is if you've actually done the shadow work and seen it all the way through. If you haven't, you'll still be responding or reacting from your own conditioning, and they might be subtle. Those patterns might be subtle and the conditioning might be subtle, but you will still be responding or reacting from that place of conditioning. Yeah. So freedom really is about working all the way through to the very end, and integrating it. And as you said, Raquel, it doesn't mean that you don't have, you know, negative emotions that come up, or thoughts that come up that might not be, you know, beautiful, but you don't kind of follow them. You're not triggered by them. You don't go chasing after them or use them as an identification with respect to, you know, I'm a spiritual person, I shouldn't be thinking this way, and I must be doing something wrong. What am I doing? You know, because that's all bullshit.
Yeah, and that's initially what I thought, you know, before I did shadow work, was that I'm gonna go through this process and then never have to feel a negative emotion or irritation or something, you know. And I think that's a common belief
It's common.
on this path.
It's common. Yes.
Mhm.
And if you have had the good fortune of being in the presence of one who is enlightened in physical form, boy, when they explode and rage comes out of them, it just stops everybody in their tracks. But there's always a teaching behind it.
Mhm.
And they may be saying something to one person for the sake of someone else. But
Yes.
it's still there. That still comes out, but there's no attachment to it. It
Mhm.
just comes out, it's said, and it's left alone.
Yeah.
The processing. Well, can I just show, for those of you listening to us, this is, can you see this? This is Julie's, one of Julie's books, Meeting the Shadow, sorry about the ring light, Finding Yourself, and then a handbook on how to transform the dark side of your personality. You can find that in Smashwords. And those of you, I see a few comments up there, Karen. I think that's how you say your name. I love that spelling, Caryn. That's where you start. Just get that book and you'll be on your way. You don't have to. The thing about it is if we let our mind overthink, oh my gosh, I know I should do shadow work. I know I should do it. I keep getting called back to these people. How do I do it? That's your mind. You'll just never do it unless you just say, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to get the book. It's going to guide me. And then I'm going to go on my way, right? Because your mind's going to keep you out of that as long as it can.
Yes.
Just know that. Your mind is not your friend right now, even though we're going to make friends with our mind down the road. That's part of the integration, making friends with the mind. Right now, the mind is saying, nope, I like where I am. I'm king here. You're addicted to me. You're addicted to the thoughts I bring you. You're addicted to the beliefs I show you. You're addicted to it. So you know what? That mind is going to do whatever it can to keep you out of this work. So put your mind away. Go to Smashwords right now while you're listening to me and buy that book. It'll just be digital. You can pop it up. You can read a page a day, and I guarantee you it's still going to get you going. You don't have to read the whole book in 2 seconds, right? It's very, just the energy itself will start to guide you very profoundly down this path.
Yeah. Jason has a question, Julie, that maybe you want to address. He said, so is the goal outcome to become the observer in each situation and be able to choose your response?
Is the goal, say that again, is the goal?
Is the goal or outcome to become the observer in each situation and be able to choose your response?
So firstly, you're always the observer. You're always that which is prior to any movement or thought or any feeling. You know, that's the truth of who you are, right? But what happens is we are taught to identify with personhood, with being the person and the story and all of those things. So your innate beingness, your true identity, is source, which you could call the perceiver or the seer or the witness or whatever, right? But what happens is, unless you do shadow work, you'll keep, even if you learn to meditate and whatever, and you have these blissful moments or experiences, you'll still keep being pulled back into personhood and identification with the person because you haven't dealt with that which is unconscious within your personality. So with respect to the goal of shadow work, essentially the real goal of shadow work is to meet and greet and transform, you know, these old beliefs and patterns and conditioning and so on and so forth. And then through that, there will be a moment or there'll be an experience where you see and directly recognize source itself as being your primary identity, and it doesn't come and go, it remains. So the real goal of shadow work is self-realization or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it. You know, rather than thinking it's like 10 lifetimes away, it's available and it's accessible here and now. But to get there is through the door of the darkness and the shadow.
Yeah.
I find that, oh, go ahead. Do you want to?
Go ahead.
We all have so much to say. I love it.
I know.
You know, I love instead of that, like, there's so much, you know, comes from Julie. This is partly what Julie has taught me. Just languaging. As far as languaging goes, it's kind of like an old model to talk about enlightenment in that way, because enlightenment has this shadow work in itself. Enlightenment is about transcending ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
This is about the path of returning to ourselves and remembering who we truly are. And when you get stuck, and this is something Julie told me many years ago that I had to process and integrate. When you get stuck as the witness or the observer, that's a type of dissociation as well, I find, which is also a very, let's call it, light shade of shadow. Right? Because the more you get into it, the bigger stuff kind of, let's say the more obvious stuff starts to process. And then you're getting into really hidden, secret stuff. And so I think it's profound to understand that that witness state or that observer state can be a place where we can tend to get stuck, if that's a good word, because it is a state of dissociation. And what I have found is, you know, I mean, just living life, there's such a different flow to it. It's like I was reading the other day in Chasm of Fire again, because that's the book that Julie was just talking about. I think I read it a lot, but I just love going back to it. It's so good. And her teacher talks about Sai Baba. It was Sai Baba, right? He talks about how life is like a river, right? We're not walking a path anymore in a way. It's not like we have to think about putting one foot in front of the other, Where do we go now? No, it's almost like you're just floating along in that river, you know, because that's what happens. This flow, you start to hook up into this flow, or that's what I've found has happened to me. And then, you know, the person you're thinking about, you text and they're not okay and they needed your support, right? That kind of thing, which we've all experienced. But that kind of thing becomes very, very, that becomes your life. It doesn't become this kind of weird synchronistic thing that happens every once in a while. That becomes your daily, everyday kind of existence, which I think is a profound understanding. So I don't know that there's, I don't even know that goal's a word. It seems like such a masculine idea. It's so much more about returning to what you are already right now.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Because actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
What you just said is absolutely on point, April. And I can speak from my own direct experience because there was a time when I was like a crazy person repeating the mantra, repeating Om Namah Shivaya, you know, even as I was going through my day at work. And I'd sit through meetings repeating the mantra when really I should have been engaged and listening. And I was trying to sort of disassociate and pull back and kind of be above it all. And, you know, what happened is through shadow work, it really brought me back into my body and into the fullness of my awareness and my authentic state, which included everything. And it included frustration at having to sit through meetings that went on forever and a day, you know. But, you know, being there, being fully present and, you know, recognizing that there was something that I needed to learn from it was really important. So, yeah, so it's really about understanding that and as I said, including everything and not trying to sort of pull away because, you know, you're more elevated than the others.
And again, that goes back to mind, right? This is what you've been saying kind of for the last couple months. Any tier or hierarchy or level, our minds love that. They love it because they're like, "Ooh, I'm special."
Yes.
I'm special.
Yes.
You know, I heard this Neil deGrasse Tyson thing the other day, you know, the astronomer, and it was called it's some show about like this comedian eats hot wings, and it goes from like the least hot to the hottest, and he keeps asking them very intense questions, you know, until they're just crying and still talking, you know. But Neil deGrasse Tyson ends with that, and I can't remember the show, but it's on YouTube and it's hilarious, and it's only about 10 minutes long. But he asks something about the stars. He said, oh, I know the question. It was, how would you say now that we're not all that special, knowing the gargantuanness, if that's a word, of the multiverse? And he had the best, most profound answer. He said, you know, the 4 things we're made up of as human bodies, the entire universe is made up of. And just because we're made up of that doesn't mean we're not special. What it means is we are that.
Yes.
Which is so profound.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, even physically we are that.
Yes. Yes. And that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I was going with that one, but it was just...
For me, I kind of want to go back to Jason's question of the observer, because for me, that witness consciousness has always been a part of my life. And so I don't know if that's what he's talking about, because I remember from a very young age going into that. And even it wasn't in a situation where I was disassociating. It was like I would be doing the dishes and I would pop into that observer state where I would be watching myself do something. And I would have the thought of like, this is so weird. How am I here? Why am I doing this? And that has been with me my entire life. And I did notice, you know, there were some periods in shadow work where I would try to disassociate from what I was feeling, and I would go into the observer role. But then I would know that I was trying to bypass what I was feeling. So I don't know if that's what Jason's speaking of becoming the observer in each situation. It's not even after you get through your ingrained patterns and shadow work, it's not even going into the observer to choose your response. It becomes like your state, right? Like it starts to become so natural that that's the state that you spend a lot of time in. And and when you're in that state, there is really no reaction to anything. It's like a emptiness.
Yes. Although if there's a kind of reaction, let's say, or a response that's required, then a fiery one, let's say,
yeah,
then that takes place. But you know, Jason's question is really a fantastic question, because you know, we wouldn't be here having this conversation if we hadn't had, as you said, Raquel, experiences of being in the witness. I remember the same thing from when I was really young. But it's important to understand that there's something prior to the witness, which is, you know, source itself. I mean, it's hard to put into words, but source itself, absolute awareness itself, or whatever you want to call that. Mm-hmm. And Mooji, actually, if you know Mooji, he puts it really well, because he asks the question, can the perceiver, which is another word for the witness, right? The perceiver or the witness, can the perceiver be perceived? In other words, is there something prior to witness consciousness or presence, or whatever you want to call that state? And it's really worth inquiring into that, especially, you know, when you've done, or while you're undergoing your shadow work, because you will discover something. Mm-hmm. And it's that, if you want to call it a goal or whatever, but it's that we have been seeking our whole lives. It's not that we have to go searching after, you know, witness consciousness or being present or presence or whatever, because we've all had those direct experiences. Mm-hmm. We all have, right?
Yeah.
But discovering that there is something prior to that even is again, if you want to call it a goal, or the real sort of drive in our spiritual seeking. And that recognition really does start to happen and take place once we've done the shadow work, we've integrated and we've run it all the way through to the end. And then we are at a place in our lives where we're ready to drop seeking altogether and just let it go. And that cannot be forced. We can talk about it, but, you know, especially people that are really intent on wanting to really attain enlightenment or realization, whatever you want to call it, that has to run its course through you. And that might take 5 years, it might take 10, it might take, is my case, I must have been very stubborn. It took 30 years before I got to a place where I said, this isn't going to take me anywhere. This is just this realization. I've done everything I can and I'm still getting nowhere. And I just dropped everything. So, and that is when you really start to live and you really start to see and you really start to recognize what has always been here.
And I think that's a really important point to emphasize and underline, is that this is not a path of attainment. This is a path of dissolution. Yes. Not dissolution, like dissolving is what I mean.
Yes.
It's about knowing, first of all, that we have a habit, first of all, even before that, it's about being willing to see and know the habit. Then it's being willing to acknowledge the habit. And I think you said to me something that I use all the time, which was so profound then, which of course I didn't understand, but it all resonated so much that I can remember everything, where you said the seeing of a habit or pattern is the death of that habit or pattern. Yes. And that's what, it doesn't matter if it takes 2 seconds or 3 years or whatever, you know, we have some actual physical things going on, right? We've got ridges in our brain that equal habits. So it's not like we're just gonna take jaw gripping, for example, as a physical thing, right? So you grip your jaw, you grit your jaw. I've done it all my life, had migraine headaches, had to wear one of those little plate things. Finally came to acknowledge that the habit of gripping my jaw was coming from deep mental stress. And that was an outward manifestation of that. Mm-hmm. Now, after all these years, the pattern has almost dissolved, but it may never fully dissolve as far as a physical pattern. Like sometimes I'll be, you know, thinking something and I'll be catching myself gripping my jaw. I don't have headaches anymore. I don't have jaw issues anymore. But that pattern is, you know, still kind of there. It's just that I'm not enslaved to it anymore, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You know, and our proclivities don't necessarily just go away. If you had, you know, if your nervous system reaction is a fight reaction and you get angry before you run away, right? You know, mm-hmm. A lot of this is about nervous system training and recognizing the way we react to triggers. When we start to recognize the way we react to triggers, then we can start to recognize when we're triggered, number one, because sometimes we don't even know that we're triggered, right? I mean, that's a huge thing. And then number two, we can start to feel in our bodies how that triggering is happening, and then identify, oh, that's anger. Am I going to go into the habit that I usually have when I'm angry? And that's what's so interesting, is that the habit I have when I'm angry is going to be probably totally different than yours. Like, you know, like Julie said, some attention like is better than no attention. So in some families, you might have grown up and anger might be the only way that you were seen. In my family, and I'm in Julie's family, like anger was like too big to handle. So we just, you know, I kind of like recede when I get angry. And then I realized, oh, that's what I'm doing. I did it the other day. I got really angry and now I know. I just went and processed it. I went and stood in the shower and I like cried and I scrunched my face up and I felt it all come, and it felt like it was like a Looney Tune, like steam was coming off the top of my head, you know? And then it just processed, and I got out of the shower. It's totally fine. Didn't even carry it anymore. But I think knowing is so much of this work. Being ready and on your toes to be aware of what the trigger is and how you react to that trigger and how you react to the reaction of the trigger.
Yeah.
And then you see that the trigger is actually just nothing but an absolute profound gift, or at least I have.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a funny incident this morning that pointed me to these patterns that I used to be in. So my son, he didn't do something that I had been telling him to do for probably the last week. And now he's paying the price for it, right? So this morning, I just couldn't help myself. I had to say, hey, if you would have done what I said, you wouldn't be dealing with the consequences. And I kind of said it lightheartedly. And he looks at me and he goes, Mom, so what? We're dealing with what's happening right now. So it doesn't matter. And then I started laughing. And I said, I know, but I just couldn't help myself. I just had to say it. But that was one of my patterns where I would get mad and say, like, you should have been doing what I told you to do and you wouldn't be dealing with consequences and blah, blah, blah. And then I just laugh about it now. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. But that's like one of the small outcomes of shadow work,
Yes.
right? Where you still have these things come out, but they don't have any pull. You don't react to them and you can laugh about them. Like what you talked about, Julie, and the coffee cups in your cupboard.
Yes. And still driving Tony crazy because he, for some reason, it used to be the opposite way around. I used to be kind of really anal about, making everything lined up and, everything was clean and neat and tidy. And then menopause hit, and it was just like that all went to hell. And now I don't care when, it just doesn't matter to me. And he's like, so I just laugh and he will say things and I just laugh. I laugh so much. And I used to laugh a lot prior to shadow work, but now, jeepers, I just can't stop laughing. And Tony will often point things out and I'll laugh and he'll say, you're laughing because you know it's true, don't you? And I'll say, of course.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. That's what I had to do this morning when my son called me out on it. And I just laughed and said, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yes. And look, the thing as well is you, I'm sure, did that to yourself all the time too, in terms of your own mental loops.
Oh yeah.
Why, if you'd done that, then this wouldn't have happened. Why did you do that? What were you thinking?
Yeah.
And you could also have fun with, okay, where did you learn that from? Which parent or which teacher or whatever? Because that was inherited. That's an inherited. You weren't born with that.
That's right. Yeah, that was definitely inherited from my father. Yeah.
And all of that obviously is well-meaning, but it's really about just discovering what is really ours and what has been inherited, what has use and is valuable, and what really is hampering our own seeing and our own creative growth as well, because all of that too, all of those conditioned behaviors and ways of thinking will stop us from creating a blog, writing a book, doing something like this, painting a picture, whatever it is. Our creative expression becomes thwarted because we'll have these psychological conditions in place that will keep preventing us from actually taking action. Or we'll start something and then we won't, we'll say it's too difficult, And I hear that quite a bit from clients who, have these burning desires to do things like create blogs or write books or whatever, or get a business off the ground. And then they'll just throw it down the toilet within days or weeks because they'll say, oh, it didn't work, because they didn't stand behind it and keep standing behind what they were feeling they were being called to and owning that, and the psyche will kind of say, oh, but it's so difficult, there's So many hatha yoga teachers out there now. You'll be lost in the crowd, you know, whatever story comes up. So this
Yeah.
again, it's not just about, you know, we can talk about the term enlightenment or whatever, freedom, whatever we need to call it, but it's also, it has practical application with respect to your life and how you show up in your life and how courageous you are with respect to trying something new or, you know, creating a business that you've always wanted to create, you know, and really kind of owning that call to action and working with it.
Yeah. So for me, you know, my creative abilities started to come out in the middle of shadow work, where I really was felt called to write, and then I felt called to create a blog. And you know, it first started out creating a blog on WordPress, and it was awful. It was like so difficult for me to figure out, and I could have just given up and said, well, you know, here's the first roadblock. Maybe I'm not supposed to do this.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and I mean, that's what I used to do too. And so then instead, I just contacted Lisa and asked her for advice and went to Squarespace. And, you know, there were trip ups along the way where I couldn't figure out the technology part, but I just would spend time here and there trying to figure it out. And now the blog's up and running. And instead of focusing on what it's not, oh, I should be doing this, I should be promoting it, I should be doing this. There's, you know, when you feel called to turn your attention to something that needs to be looked at, then you'll be prompted to do it. But otherwise, I'm just letting it, you know, smooth sail. And then another thing too was me not wanting to do it because I was afraid of what people were going to think of me.
Yes.
That was a huge, huge aspect of my shadow work was, you know, I've tried to stay hidden my entire life and not wanting to show who I truly am or what my gifts are. And I was always afraid of judgment, and I needed that outside validation.
Yes.
Nobody's going to read my blog. Nobody's going to subscribe. And when you start doing the shadow work, all of that stuff goes out the window. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people think, because when you're worried about what people are thinking, that's coming from the mind or the ego.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It has a profound effect on your creative expression. You know, and certainly in my case, jeepers, it was almost like this massive kind of valve was turned on, and this creative force started to move through me. And, you know, I started writing, and then I was told to write the book. And then I just got this hit to submit articles to Mind, Body, Spirit magazines. And it was just phenomenal. And I often tell this story about my friend Diane Goldner, who used to be a journalist for the New York Times. And I was telling her one day when she was visiting, oh gosh, you know, and I have another editor's just written to say, yes, I'll use my article. And she just laughed her head off and she said, it's not supposed to be that easy, you know, because she knew, you know, that ordinarily it can take a little bit of kind of effort and pushing to get your work published. But it was just, you know, it was just flowing. And because I was going with the flow and there wasn't anything preventing or telling me, you know, who do you think you are submitting these articles? It'll never be published. And, you know, you're going up against all these professional writers. You're not even a professional, you know, that none of that was in place. I just loved what I was feeling and perceiving and hearing inside my being. There was a love of wanting to share it because I knew it had value. And that was really what was propelling me forward, and has done since, all the way through. You know, whenever I get a hit to do something, I just, if it feels right, I just say yes, because I know that it will be supported, and everyone and everything I need with respect to support will show up, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. We have two comments here.
We're on the same page.
Yeah, Quarantine Awakening. She asked if your book, Julie, is in printed version, which it's not.
No.
Right. Smashwords and Kindle.
Smashwords and Kindle. Yeah.
She also said, he, I don't know who Quarantine Awakening is, sorry. You spoke about the way we react to triggers and that we do time travel to childhood. Julie mentioned about the shadow dynamic in family. So what do we do if family members refuse shadow work?
Well, it's never about
Right.
family members having to do shadow work. Just because you're doing shadow work, it doesn't mean that they have to, or that you have to get behind, telling them that they should do it. You just quietly do your own shadow work and you keep your mouth shut. Essentially, is what you do. And if and as and when they're ready to do the shadow work, then it will show up, because supreme intelligence is supreme intelligence, and it will get their attention in whatever way it needs to. But it's never about getting somebody to do the shadow work just because he or she gets on your nerves and they're driving you crazy, or whatever the story is, right? Or in families, like my family are not interested at all. I don't think any of them have ever read any of my books. I think my brother-in-law went onto my website once and he commended me on, it looked really professional, which was important for him. But, I don't ever have conversations with my family about any of this work. And I absolutely respect where they are. I have no kind of mandate to try and sort of impose anything onto them. But I know that my state affects them. As I always said, your state does the work. So as long as I've done the work, as long as I am awake to the self, then that will, it will have an impact. And it's really important to understand that. And I don't think I use the word to time travel back to the.
It was me.
Oh, was it you? But
yeah.
But the thing is that with respect to a trigger or something, it's really important to kind of just stop for a second instead of reacting and pulling back or trying to sort of medicate it. You just pause for a second and look at what the story is, or what the thought is, or what the belief is that underlies that sort of need to respond or react. And there's usually some little story or idea or belief that is kind of attached to it that creates this tsunami in us. And if it links to childhood, and I have the one I've often quoted is my father telling me when I was very young, it's hard to make a decent living. That was his mantra. And you'll never make any money as a teacher. That was his other mantra. And, and I certainly took that on because he was my father and I believed him. Right? And so what happens is we live true to those beliefs until we're ready to realize that we don't have to live true to those beliefs. And this all links to shadow work as well. But you do it quietly. It's best to keep quiet, actually. And that was what the yogis taught me. Keep quiet when you're doing your shadow work. Don't make a song and dance about it. Don't go telling everybody else.
Right.
Oh, I'm busy. I need to do my shadow work. Just give me 10 minutes.
Yeah. And when you're processing something from your childhood in relation to like your parents or your siblings, you do not need to go and talk to them and process with them. This is all on your own. And this is why I said, like why I needed a teacher to help me through a lot of this stuff was because Julie had done her own work. And she's the one who helped me process what I was going through.
Yes, you need somebody who can and also somebody who just shows up and you can have a conversation with them about what you're going through and maybe how challenging it is or what's coming up for you, rather than feeling like you're trying to go onto Instagram or somewhere or Facebook and see what other people are saying, and they're essentially just copying, everybody.
Yeah.
What's happening? You know what I mean? So, and obviously that has its place and it's fine. But if you're really doing the work, you really have got to do it silently within your own being. Don't tell anybody and just keep at it, even when it becomes really gnarly and really uncomfortable and you feel like crap. Just keep going. And, I use my journal. Your journal's your best friend.
Yes.
So I would journal. I mean, I've got a whole stack, over on the shelf there. I've got 15 journals or something. And, I look back in them now from like 10 years ago or however long ago. And it's like, wow, this is really incredible.
Yeah. I think I went through 4 of them in just the year I was doing shadow work.
Yes.
Look,
Yeah, and look, the
Yeah.
other thing I do want to say as well is when you're doing the shadow work, when I was doing the shadow work, especially with respect to my parents and my mother and, you know, all of that, you know, it was really hard, very hard. And I kept doing it and doing it, you know, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, for months or even years. And then at a certain point when I met her, you know, and saw her again and we had a conversation, it was completely different because the energy of that work that I had done had an impact on her. And she actually, a few months ago, in a phone conversation, she told me she loved me and you know, certainly gave me love, and you know, said the same for Tony, and that has never happened before. So you know, the profundity of the work speaks for itself in your own life, and it will show itself in your own life without you having to try and construct or manipulate anything to get, you know, your brother to do the work or your father to do the work, because that ain't gonna happen. I can promise you that isn't gonna happen.
Mhm.
And she says, or they say, I think Quarantine Awakening says, okay, thanks, I see. I meant rather about the changed state of ours and its impact on them, which I think you just talked about. You know, I don't know where I heard it, but you know, I think it's profound to understand that we teach everyone around us how to treat us.
Yes, we do.
And so what this work does is it takes it from outside to inside.
Mm-hmm.
How is that person reflecting me back to myself?
Yes.
Rather than saying that, you know, like, you know, and of course you might have that reaction still, which I do. I'm a redheaded Aries. What else am I going to do? Right. But instead of living there and staying in that, not only anger, it's like the movement around the anger, and kind of living in that space. It's like, okay, let that process through. And then I look at myself and I say, how is this reflecting me right now? Oh, I'm being really closed-minded about this certain thing, or I'm not being understanding about, you know, and the other thing about that is I don't should on myself anymore. No. Right? I should never use that word. That word is one of the worst words in the English language. Should means basically you're saying to yourself or somebody else, they should do this. Well, they're not doing that. And that's just like, it's a non-word. So, you know, that should word, just, that's my little piece. It should be, needs to be eliminated from our vocabulary because it's not real. So I think understanding that is profound. And the thing that happens and has happened to me is when you look within, you process, you look at your beliefs, how your mind's addicted to your opinions and your ideas, and you start to process through that. And what happens is it shows up everywhere. All of your relationships. I don't care, like Julie just said, if it's who the most disconnected, and I don't even like to say that, type of person that we know, you're going to feel different. Because you are different. You're getting rid of self-doubt. You're getting rid of how do I do this, or how do I navigate around this mean person, or it just doesn't matter anymore because you're just living from this super authentic place and you're getting that mirrored back to you now.
Yes.
Which I think is really kind of the profound open secret there.
Yes. Yes.
We have one question from Barbara. She said, can you please comment on shadow work in connection with reoccurring common thread dreams?
Recurring common thread dreams. Oh, interesting question. I guess my question back would be, if it's a common thread dream, is it kind of a scary dream or a seemingly negative dream? You know, because that's important. If it's a happy, beautiful, wonderful feeling dream, then I would. I mean, and it's hard for me to sort of really detail that unless I knew what the details of the dream were. But you know, if it's kind of a scary, negative dream, then it's probably showing you something that you need to sort of resolve within yourself, within your psyche, something that's calling for your attention to look at.
And, going back to the chasm of fire, and I think Yogananda speaks this in his book as well. Always, if you can, go to the end of one of those dreams, because processing in dreams is much more, and you can speak to this probably better than I can, Julie, but processing in dreams is much more potent than in real life. I think in Chasm of Fire, he tells her it's 3 years of working awake. And I think Yogananda says it's 20 years. So that dream is making you see something, and you're not wanting to see that thing. And so you're waking yourself up, or you're, follow it if you can to the very end and let it process itself.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she said unpleasant dreams with the same subject.
Oh. So, as April said, I would, and also journaling would really help, because then you're taking it out of the sort of dream state into the waking state, and you can have a conversation with it. And if it wasn't kind of clear initially, I'd ask a question, what are you here to show me? What is the message in this dream? And especially if it's been, repeated again and again, then there's something there that's trying to get your attention. And I would ask. And also what is very helpful is to give the dream a title. If it was a book or a movie, what would the title of it be? And what is the primary message of the dream? And what is the invitation with respect to your seeing and kind of meeting it?
Yeah.
And it will start to reveal itself, because it always does.
And that's profound advice, because I think giving it a title names it, which means you can now work with it, and it kind of dissolves some of the fear of the unknown and looking, you give it a title, you give it a name. It's a different thing at that point.
Yes.
You've owned it,
Yes.
which is profound.
Yes.
I think dreams are very profound. My dreams were really profound during shadow work. And I was always receiving messages in the dream state during shadow work. And so as soon as I would wake up, I would write down what the dream was. And then it would the messages would unfold throughout the day, unless I had time to sit down and journal about it for a couple hours. And then the message would always clearly reveal itself. And it was always something I was currently working on in regard to shadow work.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that paying attention to your dreams, once you are starting that process, that's a huge part of shadow work.
Yes, it really is. It does. It really speeds things up as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking from experience, because I think, I've shared this quite a few times, but when I said, yes, bring it on, let me see everything, my dreams would just be filled with oftentimes these dark forms and entities, and these creatures that I was battle with. I met the devil I don't know how many times. I mean, just horrifying things that, a lot of that linked to my upbringing as a Catholic, going to Catholic school and all of that. So there was a lot of fear around the devil. There was a lot of fear as well about purgatory, which to me was more scary than actually going to hell, because it was described as being this place where you can't see anything and everything's grey and you just are lost, in that space. And as a kid, I used to think, gee, I think I'd rather go to hell than go stay in purgatory forever and ever. So anyway, all of that said, I would have these very dramatic, powerful dreams with these forces when I was doing the shadow work. But it was very helpful, because I would always have these profound messages that would come out of it. Like in one dream, the devil showed up and wanted to offer me a gift. And he put his hand out, and it was 2 like big beads. One was painted green, one was painted red, which signified envy and greed. And he was dressed in a suit, and he just sounded so, and I just thanked him very much, and I bowed to him, and said it was a pleasure to meet him, but thank you, no, I didn't want the and that obviously had significance with respect to what I was working on at that time. But the dreams, looking at dreams, it's really very helpful and very powerful, especially when you're doing shadow work.
Yeah.
And I think that you just told me in the last few years or so, there's a really profound way to protect. And you woke up and it's just simple words. It's well, would you like to talk? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I nobody taught me this. I don't know how I knew this, but what happened is shortly after I received Shaktipat, the awakening of the Kundalini energy in 1989, and I've always been a lucid dreamer and had visitations from angelic beings and loved ones that have passed on and so on. But certainly after Shaktipat, then, especially when I was doing shadow work, these kind of terrifying, dark sort of forms, I'd be in a lucid dream, I'd wake up in a dream, and I would often be lying on the bed, and then I'd feel the energy of this thing entering the room. And so I would say out loud, if you are of God, you are welcome. If not, leave now. And sometimes I'd have to say it 3 or 4 times very, very forcefully. And the form would eventually leave. Sometimes I would have to repeat the mantra and kind of engage and fight the thing off. But that would usually do the trick. If you're of God, you're welcome. If not, leave now. And it really does. It does make a difference if you're having those kinds of.
Yeah.
Yes, it absolutely works. And I feel like it's almost a kind of, for me, to have that is a really protective. And I've done a lot of things where I wake up, from these dreams, and I'll pray, ask Jesus to come in, and, and he does. And, but it's so pithy and easy.
Yes.
So pithy and easy, and it works. I've used it multiple times myself. And it lets you say, like, okay, well, this thing might not be what I think it is. And it may be of, when these things are showing up, they are of God, when these shadow things are showing up, this is part of us getting, moving through it. So that is of God. So I think that it's really profound to understand that you are safe to move through these things.
Yes. And the other thing that I often used to say is, in the name and through the power of Jesus, leave now. If I could feel that the energy was kind of, negative or whatever you want to call it, and that would do the trick. That would make, a difference. But, if I said that and the form was still there, then I knew it was okay. Mm-hmm. And then I would have a conversation with whatever that was and whatever that looked like.
Yeah.
So yes.
I think we're getting toward the end. I don't see any more questions. Lots of comments. Thank you, everybody, for joining the live session. And thanks for commenting and engaging with us. So, Julie, do you want to tell us real quick what you're currently working on and how people can find you and how they can get your books?
Sure. So you can find me. I'm on Instagram at Julie Hoyle Official. I'm on the Ajata Casa app, and I have a wonderful group there, which is titled Awake Now What? I have my own YouTube channel here, Julie Hoyle. You can find me via my website, juliehoyle.org. My books are on Amazon, KDP, Kindle, and then Smashwords. And I am currently working on a new book, which is shadow related, which these lovely ladies are going to be a part of, and other great teachers and people that have really done the work. So I'm excited about that. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's a lot right there.
That's a lot, yeah.
That's it.
And then April, if you want to tell, I mean, we're going to come back in 2 weeks. April and I are going to continue this show with guests and then just speaking about our path and shadow work and that kind of stuff. But tell how they can get a hold of you.
So you can get a hold of me on my website's the easiest way because everything links through there, which is aprilrenee.co. Don't put the M at the end because you'll find something different. It's .co. So aprilrenee.co. And then I'm on the app as well. And I have a group, The Wisdom of Our Bodies. And you can find my Instagram link on my website. And also you can subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, which is linked through here. And you can also find through my website. So pretty much everything, if you go to my website, you can find what you need, and it's aprilrenee.co.
Yay. And then my blog is stillnesswithin.org. It's not .com, it's .org. I'm also on Instagram, but my handle is The Stillness Within Us. And so I'm on my blog, and then I'm on Instagram, and then I have a new YouTube channel, which will be streaming our show every 2 weeks. So you can subscribe to that and find me there. I'm also on Ajatakasha, which I'm hoping we'll be able to continue the conversations on the Ajatakasha app. And I have a group on there called Truth Be Told. I changed the name of it. So we're all on that social media platform, which is really awesome to have these in-depth conversations on. So if you haven't checked it out, you can go to Ajatakasha, and I think I can put a link in the comments for this show to that app. Okay, thank you, Julie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
It's been really fun.
Yes,
so
it has.
amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Raquel.
Yeah, definitely. It's been fun creating this. This is another creation that I kept pushing through, and I really wanted to do it. So I'm glad it's turning out.
Well done.
Yeah.
And thank you to those who listened in, either during the live or will watch later on the recording. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and this show will be replayed. It'll be on replay on all of our YouTube channels, so you'll be able to find it in 3 different spots.
Yay.
Amazing. All
Thank
right.
you all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
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 Bye.
Bye.
Bye.